While covering handheld ports of TT's LEGO games, I've had the occasional comment disputing my usage of the word weird in describing some of these. Some have even gone so far as to slander me with allegations of using that word to foster the whims of the algorithms. These people fail to account for the fact that I'm more than willing to pour my heart and soul into in-depth videos that may only accrue 200 views. That's just how YouTube operates at my level. And also, you guys will know when I've succumbed to clickbait. No, dear interlocutors, I will stand by my usage of the word weird, and I will only use it when I deem it applicable. LEGO Friends was too boring to be weird, for example. The thing is that I like weirdness. With these versions of these games, weirdness is typically a good thing, per the changes it brings, as it helps them justify their existence in a series that is already insanely large, even when you're only accounting for the default ports. What I haven't really disclosed, though, is that I've been very deliberately selecting entries from eras where these almost had to be weird. You can break the LEGO handhelds down into semi-distinct eras. There was just a quick era of 2 games still lingering on the Game Boy Advance. Then you have a deceptive period where the PSP was just adapting the PS2 console versions fairly closely. But all the while, the Nintendo DS was doing its own thing, and that device lasted a deceptively long time, with even numerous PSP, PS Vita, and 3DS titles falling in line, designing those versions from that technical baseline. And then there was a peculiar isometric era, before going back to more traditional 3D design, somewhat closer to the console games again, and then handheld gaming got nuked from orbit by corporations who decided it was better to just focus on the cheaper mobile phone game marketplaces, with traditional handheld gaming suffering a near-total extinction event that only hobbyists like us kept alive until technology got to its current point where almost any game can be portable with a powerful enough device. If you zoom way back into that period of PSP and DS overlap, you'll spot today's topic: LEGO Star Wars 3: The Clone Wars. Know that it was also an early 3DS title, too. I actually didn't even realize this at first, though with the inconsistency of 3DS emulation, sticking with the reliable PSP functionality I had already utilized felt like my best move. Much like the previously discussed Indiana Jones 2, LEGO Star Wars 3 has a lot of pressures on it from a lot of different directions. The console version, yet again, was trying to push the series into new territory. The last LEGO Star Wars on PSP, LEGO Star Wars 2, had been directly ported from the console game, only with the bonus of extra content from the original game, since the complete saga was not ported for the system. If that wasn't enough pressure, the previous weird handhelds had won their fair share of fans, emerging as hidden gems from their own pressures. So LEGO Star Wars 3's handheld port was in the unenviable position of having layers upon layers of expectations from anyone who hadn't selected this title as their entry point into the games. If you're not familiar with the console version, Star Wars 3 was based on some early The Clone Wars episodes when the show was in its relative infancy of 2 seasons, and the game was really doing 2 main tasks in a meta sense. The first was just catching Star Wars up with the quality of life enhancements the LEGO games had seen since its last Star Wars title, with aiming reticles and god-awful manual levitation, and the benefits of being a purely 7th console generation game with a presumably increased budget, like massive enemy counts. To demonstrate this, the opening level recreated the arena scene from Attack of the Clones, which was appropriate as the opening volleys of the Clone Wars, the event, and just to showcase this new tech, since the former version had been heavily inaccurate per system and development limitations. The second was to introduce big new gameplay systems as a selling hook to stand out from its predecessors, most prominently massive land battles serving as light, real-time strategy battles, where you command swaths of troops and build bases and summon vehicles as you go. And the more traditional levels sometimes had story swap moments, where characters are separated in different locations, but you can switch between them instantaneously. Now, LSW3, in hindsight, doesn't creep into the highest echelons of the franchise. Some might even be so bold as to say it's on the lower end of the spectrum. It is me, I am that bold. It wasn't for lack of ambition, I'll give it that much. It also is pretty great during its highlights. It's just really held back by its low points. It was the only one of these that tried the RTS systems, which gives it some novelty. Mediocre novelty, because it turns out a real-time strategy game where the enemy doesn't really conquer back is just not very exciting. And the vehicles all either move around or fire too slowly. And you can get randomly exploded from a distance by enemy cannons with little fanfare, and those large-scale battle zones just end up feeling too open and empty, and so the whole concept just gets tedious. Not all of the design of the game is bad or anything. The game's hub was cool, with both a Republic and a Separatist ship in an ongoing space battle that can dart around between different systems to boot, giving a good amount of spectacle. Plus, slowly unlocking new areas via gold bricks you're unlocking naturally from the levels gave a great sense of progression. The spaceship battles were pretty cool, too. Instead of the floaty, flat vehicle levels of yesteryear, this one managed to make things a bit more precise and a bit more dynamic. Since the invisible plane vehicles inhabit actually has some dynamic curvature to make it feel like you're not just on a flat plane, even though you mechanically are, and the new ability to switch between space and on-foot traversal pretty seamlessly pushed it across the line into feeling like quite the improvement. And when the traditional levels were in play, there were some standouts, like Legacy of Terror, where you traverse down deeper into the atmospheric crypts before zombie Geonosians start crawling out at you from the dark, continuing to attack you as you dismember your way through them, like some sort of baby's first Dead Space. Before the game froze my entire PS3 and forced a reset, which was frustrating, as I'd also had to restart the level because the god-awful manual levitation got the bricks inseparably stuck, something that happened again after rebooting my PS3, and really taking the wind out of my sails on this one. Oh yeah, I was saying good things. Yada yada, all the build-up, leading to the encounter with their queen, complete with multiple gags lampooning the original episode's overt similarities to the Alien franchise, which I freaking love. That is, I love the gags and I love the Alien franchise both. What I'm trying to communicate, I suppose, is that, with both the main version's lows needing to be avoided, and the highs having to be compared against, is LEGO Star Wars 3's handheld port weird enough to do the job? Or as a normal person might say it without trying to justify an algorithmically friendly title, does it do enough to merit a visit if you've already played the other version? Before I get too into things, much like when I covered Indy 2, I am using the PSP version for the graphical capabilities. Again, didn't even try to make the 3DS version happen for the slim upgrade that could have brought. However, I also have very high regards for the OG DS version, as it does a very charming presentation to accommodate its visual limitations. And considering the things that this version pulls off on that device, it simply gets more impressive under those considerations. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The firstest of glances will not tip the handheld port's hand towards dissimilarity, as the hub throws you right onto the bridge of the Resolute with a similar layout and control center. Poking around will reveal the first downgrade, though. The hub is much smaller and much simpler, and while it is all available from the outset, unlike its console counterpart, it does trade off the feeling of progression and the drive to be more dynamic than what came before. Keep that in mind. This hub is certainly functional enough. It has everything you need: the in-game store, the minifigure customizer, a minikit viewer, a variety of roaming characters to switch out between, and even some arcade games you will unlock through a red brick, which I'll return to at a more appropriate time. Function, though, is the bare minimum, and I'm not really thrilled to linger in this place the same way I would be in a more engaging hub. The full game really benefits having more to do there. Red bricks are hidden in the hub instead of levels, as well as utilizing the new space combat and vehicle platforms in the midst, and even beyond that, the atmosphere isn't even captured all that well with the really plain Jane flat lighting. Weirdly, the weakest of the versions, on the Nintendo DS, actually appeals the most to me here. Despite everything else in the game being the same, the hub layout isn't. It still suffers the simplicity, but in a space I enjoy being in more. It's arranged in a loop with everything you need more rapidly accessible in rooms off of that loop. And somehow the ambiance was better recreated. Genuinely strange that this one element definitively changed. This does make me paranoid that perhaps something else in the DS port was somehow also different from the PSP or 3DS, but I wasn't about to go and play hours and hours more just to calm some anxiety. Trust me, I would just find something else to be anxious about anyway, like focusing on the times I said idiotic things in front of people I wanted to impress, or getting hyperfixated that I'm letting my own projects down because I just don't have enough hours in the day or energy in my bones to get everything done I would like to work on, or losing myself to the dreadful thoughts about dangers that could be happening to my loved ones. Like, I don't know for sure that the bat I've found perching outside my front door on a couple of occasions isn't trying to introduce my dog to the novel coronavirus COVID-25, unleashing a new plague upon our world from which we will suffer for years to come yet again. Why yes, I am seeing a therapist. How could you tell? Structurally, this one is going for the early series standard. The meat of the game is a series of individual levels holding all of the collectibles, so you'll need to replay in free play for 100% completion. It's not a bad setup, certainly, though it does feel extra simple considering both the console games had been emphasizing larger worlds and new mechanics, and even the most recent handheld ports prior had actually played around with some massive structural changes too. Exemplified well, as we already covered, in Indy 2, and its explorable island outside of the levels. Link Wherever, if you didn't watch that one, though this wasn't the only one. There was also, that one other game in between these titles, for the franchise that really triggers weird chuds in my comments when I make fun of its textual and authorial failings. Like when I said how wizards pooping themselves was in fact bad world building, and these dummies were too chicken to come out swinging with the actual bigotry they believe, so they deflected by vaguely siding with Jujubee's K rolling. The K stands for Klingon. But when you're trying to be vague to dog whistle your hate speech, in this context, you're agreeing that Magic Fantasy lands should indulge in scatological failure? That's a weird hill to die on, weirdos. Point is, though I haven't covered it yet, LEGO Harry Potter the First's handheld port was also taking a swing at a more unique structure. You could probably call this one a return to form if you're feeling positive, but a detractor could just as easily call it a step back. Your mileage is going to vary, and that's fine. I'll save my takeaway until the end to keep you in suspense. Along with these structural changes, the gameplay itself does have some fairly big differences. Particularly attentive viewers may have already spotted the first big one in the footage already. There's no player 2 on screen. I probably don't have to tell anyone this far into the video, but one of the most noteworthy elements of these games is the presence of a second character in tandem. It's often the first change these games have to make to the source material to enforce the gameplay setup has enough people to play as. Other handheld ports commonly leave you an AI sidekick, even for solo players to get that co-op experience, but not this one. I'll explain why in a second. What's crucial here is that it absolutely changes level design a moderate amount, as puzzles prior often only work by getting all 4 feet standing in the same place at the same time. Sure, there were always handheld limits before. Indy had only 2 characters present, but often had more than 2 characters in a level, leaving Marcus Brody or Willie Scott or whoever waiting in the void until you'd switch someone over to them, which could even lead to being able to cheese out certain collectibles when a character probably wasn't supposed to be able to get somewhere in story mode, but you weren't just alone like you are here. Even in the moment-to-moment gameplay, there are some obvious mechanical differences. The console version really beefed up what Jedi can do, like throwing lightsabers with battering mechanics, cutting shapes out of brick walls, wall jumping, and of course, the one that I really fucking loathe. Lightsaber throwing is completely gone, manual levitation isn't a thing, and everything else gets shuffled onto these specific Jedi/Sith pads, where it automatically goes to cut out the circle or initiates wall jumping, or even sometimes just does super force jumps. There will still be objects that need the force to interact, and like every other version of the game, objects that you need the dark side to interact with. But there is one change here too. You might notice, at first, that every Jedi is given a green glow instead of their matching lightsaber color. It's not laziness on the developer's part, it's deliberately indicating the light side of the Force. See, occasionally, there are light side exclusive interactables. Since you almost never have a dark side user in a story mode party, I'm not sure why they made such a subtle distinction like that. But hey, it's still neat. Blaster users feel even more different in action because shooting mechanics are wildly different. The console's aiming reticles, by holding the button, are not a universal ability here. This version swaps it out for strafing, which was not in the main port. Here, when you hold down attack, the character will continue firing in the direction they started in. Even heavy gun users did not do this on mainline systems, rotating on a point unless firing in motion. Now, this takes a little getting used to, but with the combat and the camera angles built with this in mind, I get why they did this, and it does eventually get to feeling natural. The other big mechanical difference is that newly available top face button, left abandoned by the lack of tagging between characters, and for different classes, it does different things. Standard blasters do get manual aiming reticles on this button. Heavy gunners get a variant of the stun grenades some characters had in the main port, though also manually aimed. And bounty hunters, of course, have their thermal detonators. Those two grenade types can be a little finicky to use because of weird aiming, and it legitimately took longer than it should have for me to get used to it. Lightsaber wielders on this button, however... I'ma be real with you, Chief, I could not figure out what this weird wiggly thing is supposed to be. It's definitely not a counter, and it's definitely not for deflecting or attacking in any way I could manage to figure out. Yoda actually gets a dodge roll instead, weirdly enough. I was also not able to find any digitized versions of game manuals online, or anyone talking about this port enough to explain it, so if any of you are more well-informed, please let the rest of us know down in the comments. In with all of these other gameplay changes, there is an entire class of character missing. Furthering these ports' weird war against bazookas, there are no rocket troopers. At all. These bastards were too cowardly to include the coolest recurring weapon in the LEGO games. I am so likely to pick an RPG fella when given the choice in the main games, so for them to be nerfed so hard for the prior games, and then $1 million babied out of this one altogether, makes me very sad. In their place, the occasional bomb-planting clone spots seem to have been more widely adapted into an ability for heavy troopers to do controlled detonations. Other missing abilities include troop commanding, which is no great loss as it was just used to less efficiently destroy gold bricks when heavy guns did the same thing but better, electrical panels, and protocol droid panels, as they are now just folded into having the same access as astromechs. Jetpack battle droids also have this access, presumably so they don't break the game by giving you a hover character that would replace the astromechs. These use a rotating lock minigame that feels appropriate for R2s, but these were not original to this game, as they occurred in prior handheld ports too. On the topic of access panel minigames, there are still bounty hunter panels, weirdly identified with the original version of Mandalorian helmets, and not the version that was in circulation with the real figures at this time. These sort of appear to be a Guitar Hero game, but you don't have to hit all of them, just the correct ones. Separatists also get access panels, and these are just playing memory tiles. I really wish these games I covered would stop showing me how bad my short-term memory is. It's very upsetting. This is all kind of small picture stuff, but there is a big difference I should probably bring up right about now. The land battles are gone completely. No more of that. Perhaps the 3DS could have managed them. They squeezed some surprisingly bigger console ports onto that thing. But I doubt the PSP could have approximated any form of these well enough, and I guarantee the DS could not have managed it. So, short of just, reusing Hellbent's mechanics from LEGO Battles, which would have slapped, but I digress, any expectation for those in those two would have been unrealistic. These are often where the biggest differences lie, and since I don't like them all that much, more often than not, the lack of these makes for more interesting levels here, which I will actually highlight further later. The other big change is not a loss, but actually a gain. Compared to the flatter space combat the premium version got, LEGO Star Wars 3's handheld port actually has in-depth dogfighting controls. You are properly going up and down and shooting all around with dodge controls for enemy missiles locking onto you, and your own missiles you can lock onto them to fight back, and it is so much more impressive than that other version. The console ports didn't get anything properly like this until LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens. It's insanely cool to see it here on a 3DS and PSP, but they were even pulling this off on the DS without a hiccup. That's just insane to me. These are, without a doubt, the highlight here and my favorite part of the experience. So when you draw all of this in together, you do have a very smooth and fun experience. I've complained about the combat of other handheld ports, but there is no need here. Lightsaber melee is buttery smooth, slicing and flowing between foes. So even when you hit a multi-hit point enemy like a super battle droid, it never feels slow. Switching over to a gunner and blasting your way through opposing forces, strafing back and forth to dodge incoming fire, is also just so fun. I was often torn as to which combat style I wanted to adopt in the heat of the moment. Normal blasters unfortunately fall a little bit by the wayside, as they're just not as fun to use as those other two, but that is honestly the case for the normal version as well. It's not all perfect, and there are a few wrinkles. Whenever you have to jump on a mounted gun, you're almost certainly just going to die, as there is no way to not get hit. And fighting the occasional Magna Guards trips up the combat a little. Instead of the QTE to mash the attack button, it's a different QTE to twirl the control stick around. But it inconsistently has trouble triggering the QTE to start. Neither of these are deal breakers, or even necessarily often enough to be a big problem, but they are still blemishes on an otherwise well-polished combat experience. Collectibles have chilled out a bit since some of the prior coverage, primarily losing the 3 extra tokens system that simply made you work harder for the same number of mini-kits. It's now just classic mini-kits and classic red bricks, though you do get a bombastic score when you pick one up. It gets a bit silly once you've heard it dozens of times. Unlike the console port, which had the unique hook of unlocking minifigures to represent characters from non-Clone Wars portions of the Star Wars universe, this one sticks to classic mini-models of starships. But considering you can use them in flight combat free play, I think it is a justified trade-off. Red bricks also mix things up a little from the barely changing extras list we saw in the other covered handheld ports. We finally get a full suite of times 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 with no weird omissions, as well as also returning fast build, regenerate hearts, and invincibility. Space battles get 2 with flight weapon power-up and infinite missiles. There is Funny Jump, which gives every normal jump the trampoline sound effect used for bouncy surfaces, which gets obnoxious very fast. There is also Auto Pickup, a peculiar little extra that fills a similar role to Stud Magnet to make stud collecting more efficient, though this one is even stronger than that. Not only does it just give you the studs after they drop, it's a permanent upgrade instead of being toggled in the menu. Now, I'm the kind of guy who never turns off the stud extras, so my gameplay was functionally unchanged, but some people may not like the lack of a choice in the matter. Finally, one red brick also unlocks all arcade minigames. These are as follows. Astromech Volleyball, a 2D rendition of the sport where R2-D2 and R3-S6 are inexplicably using a thermal detonator. Snowball Fight, which I was initially delighted to see carried over the mechanics from Indy 2, only to quickly realize the thing is too poorly programmed to disable extras like regenerate hearts, which really breaks the thing since it is scored on an endless rounds basis. Saber Ball, where you are both playing baseball and using the force to guide the ball to a target, and then just a challenge to destroy as many vulture droids as you can within a time limit. These are really only a brief novelty, and do not feel as groundbreaking as the gameplay changes throughout Indy 2. When they're not visually lazy like the first one, they just don't offer a ton to come back to. The character rosters are usually of note for these ports, and there are certainly some changes here. There are predictably several exclusive characters, like Anakin and Obi-Wan in their snowsuits, Jar Jar's Jedi disguise from Bombad Jedi.
Except now, I would like to point out that he no longer carries his gun, meaning he is even more useless.
The pink Gungan chick, Peppa Pig, I believe her name is? Numa, a Twi'lek child who is inexplicably not wearing pants, I don't like that. And several clone variants, including some helmetless versions and some specialists that just didn't appear otherwise, like the Galactic Marine. However, there is a trade-off now. Some characters didn't make it over from the console. Some of the legacy characters, perhaps because they aren't being unlocked by mini-kits here, are nowhere to be found. Most tragically for me, my boy Starkiller from The Force Unleashed, but it even creeps into Clone Wars content too. The show was good at showing a variety of clones who were either fleshed out with cool designs, distinct personalities, or both, and the main game uses many of them to great effect, but quite often here they were replaced in levels by generic counterparts, or left out entirely. Since clones are rather literally the name of the game, I was very disappointed by this. I didn't go level by level covering the other handheld ports, only highlighting the few differences since everything else sort of fell in line thanks to the structure of whatever source material was being adapted, but it's well worth my while here. See, the main game had 3 branching level paths broadly following schemes set by Ventress, Dooku, and Grievous, as well as a prologue and some epilogue levels too. This one's not so organized, just sort of smooshing things together. It feels rather incohesive. This was probably a little inevitable, since early seasons of the Clone Wars released episodes anachronistically, and you couldn't always see the timeline connections until after the fact, but the main version's structure fixed that about as much as could reasonably be done. This version doesn't just abandon that method, it scrambles and omits quite a bit. I'll label each one with the campaign and the original ports chapter so you can follow what I mean a bit more easily. The prologue and epilogue levels did not get adapted, so we lose out on the Geonosian Arena, the Zillo Beast, the Bounty Hunter focused level for Hostage Crisis, and the villain-centered level at Jabba's Palace from the Clone Wars pilot movie. 3 of those 4s are some of my favorites there. You'll never guess why the other isn't, but they are completely gone. Here we actually start with Ambush, the Yoda-centric level taking out swarms of separatists and their tanks, which served as the second level in the Ventress campaign, which is appropriately climactic to start off proceedings, though it is our first case of generic clone washing. We then jump right into Destroy Malevolence, which smooshes together levels 2 and 3 of the Grievous campaign. Then we go to Rookies, which is level 5 of the Grievous campaign. And perplexingly, we never play as the titular Rookies. Despite how instrumental, fundamental, and monumental they are to the relevant episode, only Rex and Cody are playable, with the Rookies only appearing in the final cutscene. Absolutely negligent. Next is Duel of the Droids, which was the first Grievous level, but this one stands out well against its big sister version by spending a significant amount of time outside on the surface of the station instead of jumping right inside. The actual duel is not quite as exciting though. There, it was a whole encounter, while here... And that's it. The 4th Grievous chapter, Lair of Grievous, is next, both clone washing the roster and straight up getting the secondary color of Kit Fisto's Starfighter wrong within the level, though admittedly this color scheme does look sharp AF. We finally break away from Grievous levels for Gungan General, the first of Dooku's campaign, and this one is an unambiguous improvement. Instead of just an obnoxious land battle that starts you out with little more than big dumb pachyderms, we get a proper level. Jar Jar, weirdly in his homeless Phantom Menace look instead of his correct attire, is strapping heat instead of keeping his super jump, and you fight your way through a canyon, fighting pirates, before switching inside the pirate base to play as the kidnapped Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Dooku in their tentative, temporary alliance to escape. Jedi Crash correctly follows this one, combining levels 2 and 3 of the Dooku campaign, and wiping out another land battle in the process, which very often happens when the levels get combined. Then we're back to the first of Ventress's levels, Hidden Enemy, and then the 3rd of the same campaign with Blue Shadow Virus. The next 2 follow correctly on Ventress's campaign as well, combining the 3 preceding Ryloth levels into 2, which are good levels, but again, kids should be wearing pants. What is this, Lewis Carroll's personal hobbies? Don't feed into the racist Twi'lek stereotypes, TT Fusion. We go back to Dooku, Chapter 5 for Weapons Factory, which is again an unambiguous improvement since the main version just keeps making you repeat the same land battle 3 times from scratch, and is bullshit, whereas this one just focuses on the fun parts. Finally, we end with Legacy of Terror, the last of the Dooku levels, but with the boring flat lighting, we lose out on the fake spooky atmosphere that makes the level more memorable in the first place, and they obnoxiously hide a mini-kit at the end of the chase at the end of the level, which you can miss out on if you mess up, making a big pain to replay the whole segment of the chapter to attempt it again. We close out on a very amusing cutscene where Anakin is torn between a light and dark side cupcake, and if I'm not mistaken, it is either unique to this version or was also used for general promotional material for LEGO Clone Wars stuff, but that has been far too long, and I had to make space in my brain for other things in the meantime, like knowledge of all the NECA aliens figures I unyieldingly long for, and yet will likely never own. So someone else will have to help me with that part. So to bring this whole thing full circle, whether or not you think LEGO Star Wars 3's handheld port is weird enough, or does enough to justify a playthrough, will depend on quite a few factors. If you're like me, and you're just a completionist for these games with a passion for these ports, you'll have a great time. It plays well, and the usual high quality of level design for these still shines through. If you are someone who didn't click with the normal version, this may also be a worthwhile replacement for you too. From there though, I think takeaways will get more divided. If you have any sort of LEGO game fatigue, this one is not going to mix up enough to win you over. If you were a kid with only a DS, this one likely did the trick nicely. Though if you had a PSP or a 3DS, some of the constraints may have made this one start to feel a little long in the tooth. I do think this one has benefited a little from the passage of time, as nostalgia and seeing a game represent where the series used to be that might have missed your radar will justify checking it out. And though I am sad I can't just as universally recommend this one the way I have others, I'm more than happy I spent the time with this one myself. Well, would you look at that? It's time for my usual call to action. Thanks always to my patrons. And if you want to support the channel, you too can do so there for as little as $1 a month. One-time donations through Ko-fi are also certainly welcome. Even without doing those, liking and leaving me a comment make me very grateful as they help videos grow, or just subscribing to see future stuff, or going back and watching older stuff you may have missed, will already be going above and beyond. I'm not leaving an explicit teaser for my next LEGO video this time, but rest assured, I actually have some very big plans for those coming up in the new year, so keep your eyes open on here for when that announcement comes.